Hey everybody, Aaron Cowan, Sage Dynamics. This video we're going to talk about making the transition from iron sights to the red dot sight on the handgun. I don't think it's any secret that I am a fan of red dot sights on handguns. But if you dig really deep in this channel, you'll find a video I did on my first experiences with red dot sights on a handgun, and I compared it to iron sights, and I found that during my comparison I was faster, more accurate, more consistent using irons than I was on the red dot sight, especially at closer distances. And this is one of the things I see come up time and time again. I have students raise the question in classes. I see it on the internet. People ask me about it when they see me. Irons are going to be faster, closer. Irons are going to be more consistent. There's that training curve, and there's absolutely a training curve. But if you remember, there was a pretty significant training curve when you learned how to shoot a handgun to begin with, especially with iron sights. Shooting a handgun is a little bit more complicated compared to, say, a rifle, because we only have those 2 points of contact, and we're really relying on a lot of our just natural ability, natural eye-hand coordination, and our natural ability to keep the firearm stable to get proper sight alignment, proper sight picture, and to actually shoot accurately as distance increases. But also, even at closer distances, that sight alignment can be problematic until we build the proficiency we need to kind of make it instinctual, if you will, or unconsciously competent. So when people put a red dot on a handgun and they shoot it for the first time, usually one of two things is going to happen. Either they're going to shoot it and not like it and sell it, or if it's, you know, they borrowed it from a buddy, they're going to be like, that thing's stupid, or they're just not going to put in the time, or they're going to dedicate the time and start down the path of dedicating the same amount of time they dedicated to learning how to be proficient on iron sights to begin with. It's going to take you a considerable amount of time. Just because you know how to use an optics or a sighting system on one platform, iron sights, does not necessarily, or really doesn't mean at all, that you're immediately going to become proficient when adding another sighting system to that platform. If you want to see evidence of this, grab your AR out of your safe or wherever you happen to keep it, take it to the range, take the optic off of it, or just turn the optic off and use your backup iron sights and see how proficient you are with iron sights compared to your red dot optic. Now, I know apples and oranges and all that, but what that will show you, unless you're one of those people that puts an equal amount of time on both systems, is that because you've been relying on the red dot optic, or the scope, if you will, on your rifle, you have kind of let your iron sight skills on a rifle perish. So now you're seeing kind of the reverse evidence of the fact. And just because you build proficiency with a thing, and this is an example of it, just because you build a proficiency with a system does not mean you automatically get to keep it. There are two distinct problems when it comes to making the switch and getting your brain rewired or wired differently, or introducing new neural pathways, if you will, into using the red dot on a handgun. The first one is the fact that the iron sights both exist on the same plane. So if I'm using iron sights and I'm coming up for my sight alignment, I'm able to correct the front of the gun by referencing the rear of the gun. So I'm able to work in my sight alignment. It's actually quite easy because both of these front and rear sight exist, while they are on two different focal planes, they are on the same object. So it makes very easy corrections possible and intuitive and quick. So if I'm having a misalignment issue with my presentation, if I'm torquing too hard with my left hand, torquing too light with my right hand, or any other combination thereof, I've got a slight bend at the wrist or something like that, my brain, after considerable practice, can automatically recognize the issue and make a correction for it without me even really having to do anything, which is a kind of a proprioception thing. When one hand realizes what the other hand's doing, and it references that visual input to make the correction on the gun, give us proper sight alignment, then we can get our sight picture, then we can take our shot. With the red dot, when properly used, the dot floats independent of the handgun. So presenting the firearm and getting the dot referenced properly is more of an issue of eye-hand coordination to the target, aligning our hands to the target, than it is allowing us to make corrections based off of visual input from what the gun is doing. So if you've been shooting front sight, as you should, and of course there's another school of thought that says you can look through your sights in certain situations to gain speed, but that's kind of a different subject. So if I'm pressing out and the only thing I'm looking for is to acquire a front sight focus, target back to front sight, or maybe target back to rear to front, back to target, back to rear, or back to front to get our proper sight alignment, right? So if I'm pressing out and I reference that front sight picture or that front sight post in my visual plane, even if I'm still target focused, I can make that rough reference point and then really just bring the rear sights up into the notch to stack that front sight and the rear notch, give myself my sight alignment, my sight picture, take the shot. I don't have that ability on the red dot. If I'm using the red dot properly, what I'm relying on is eye-hand coordination. And what I see consistently with shooters, their problem isn't aligning the gun to the target, so to speak. It's aligning the optic to the eye. And that's really an issue of, one, the firearm's height relative to the eyes themselves, and two, their body's doing things with the handgun that it's been doing with iron sights. And those things don't necessarily work well with the red dot sight. So as I'm pressing out, if I'm looking for that front sight can get me my dot. But that kind of negates the advantages of the red dot sight. I'm going to stay target focused, and I'm just going to press the gun out. Now, for proper alignment, what I'm going to do is I'm going to think about this back plate. The back plate on the handgun, the rear hammer, depending on whatever your optic's mounted on. And what I want to do is align that back plate with the tip of my nose. Bear with me, I know it sounds silly, but eye-hand coordination is a thing. In fact, if you drink a little bit too much, or if you're suspected of drinking a little bit too much and you get pulled over by one of the police guys, one of the things they're going to want you to do is demonstrate proprioception without visual input, which is touching the tip of your nose with your finger, which is a very popular field sobriety test. And there's a reason for that, because under normal faculties, without any substances coursing through your bloodstream, it's recognized that, and again, without medical conditions and any other contributing factors, anyone should be able to do that. So what I'm doing is a modified version of that. What I'm trying to do is get my hands to align this back plate with my nose. It's pretty simple. It's one of the, this is one of those things that guys are like, oh, you just gave out the greatest trick ever, I'll never take a class with you. And yeah, you might be right, but you're probably wrong. If I can align that back plate with my nose, it's going to put my optic window exactly where it needs to be in reference to my eyes. And that's what I want. And that completely eliminates, with proper practice, the need for referencing anything else off of the gun itself. I'm going to remain target focused the entire time, like you should be. We don't focus on the dot, we focus on the target. That's how the optics are designed. That's how they've always been designed. And that's the way they continue to be designed, because that's the best way to shoot with a red dot sight, is target focus. There are caveats to that for certain circumstances, but by and large, I'm staying target focused through the entire process. So this is a factor of kinesiology, or eye-hand coordination, proprioception, building proper neural pathways, and there's a lot of things neurologically that are going on to kind of retrain what we're doing. And it does require an investment of time. It requires deliberate practice, and I encourage you guys to look that up. In fact, there's a book called Peak, which is literally, the whole book is about a deliberate practice, and it teaches you how to deliberately practice certain things. And it's something, if you've taken a class with me, you know I talk about this all the time. Deliberate practice is something I'm a huge believer in. I've seen it create definite improvements in my skill set, as well as the skill set of my students, when they kind of embrace the idea of deliberately practicing versus just shooting with no real plan and feel like that's practice because they're trying to accomplish one of the 3 popular metrics. But if we deliberately practice this, we're going to build that skill set, and that skill set will actually come pretty quickly relative to how much time and dedication you put into properly practicing it. Now, in order to get your proper alignment on the dot, you can do that without firing a single round from your holster, or going from a high ready or a low ready, and working on increasingly smaller targets. So I may start out with a body-sized target put up on a wall and start working my distance back, and then I'm going to start looking for smaller and smaller and smaller points of aim, to where eventually I'm aiming for just the tip of the bad guy's nose, or maybe that X zone right there in the high thoracic cavity, or a light switch, or a small shape, or something like that somewhere around your house. And I'm going to do it cold, and I'm going to do it, rep it out, rep it out, rep it out. One thing I do during my dry fire practice that I do every single day is I want to be able to acquire the dot on roughly a 3x5 inch size target. I want to put that dot right on that target from the holster cold. The very first draw stroke of my dry fire practice, I want to be able to get that every single time. Once I started dedicating a lot of consistent and deliberate practice to aligning that back plate to my nose, now it's just second nature. So 4 years later, since, well, really 5 years, but let's say 4 years, once I really started focusing on red dot handguns, I find myself being not only more accurate, but more consistent and faster on the red dot than I am with irons. And there's a couple of reasons for that. And of course, the main reason is the dot is telling me what the gun is doing, and it's something that you can't get from iron sights. Because your iron sights are on a reciprocating slide, that's one of the problems. And two, because your eyes are not going to near focus and back focus. The light of the beam itself gives me a lot more physical input, a lot more visual input, if you will, than a blurring front sight, rear sight that I'm not focused on anyway. If if I stay focused on that front sight and the gun cycles, I may lose my point of focus, and it's moving really, really quick. And while it is true that the optic body moves too, the light remains a light. So as I'm shooting, the red dot is telling me what the gun is doing. If my dot's bouncing high right, high left, low right, low left, I know that there's a grip correction that needs to take place. Tracking the dot through recoil once I get my grip down is very, very easy. I don't have to worry about isolating the optic from the slide to be able to do that. I just track the dot, and the dot allows me to see, and this is something you'll never get from iron sights, I don't only see what's on top and beside the dot, but I also see what's underneath it, so I can time my cadence a lot more consistently as the dot falls back to the target. If I'm shooting for, you know, cyclic speed, if I'm trying to shoot fast. If I'm shooting slow, recoil is not that much of an issue, but the dot is still going to help me diagnose my problems. And of course, the next factor is if I spend all my time shooting on the red dot on the handgun, am I going to lose my iron sight skills? This is a very debatable topic, but based on this, again, this is just me. I've got a pretty good sample size because I teach a lot of red dot classes, and I have a lot of students that come through class with red dots, and I know from my personal experience and some of my peers I've asked, unlike the rifle, because for some reason those iron sight skills on the rifle perish. They perish pretty quickly if you don't use them. On the handgun, what I've found is people who spend a dedicated amount of time working on their red dot skills and improving their skill set, it actually makes their iron sight skills better. Now, my theory for this is the fact that because if we know how to listen to the dot, if we know to look for what the dot's telling us and make our corrections accordingly, it actually allows us to, or it forces us in a way to really perfect our grip and our trigger techniques. And presentation is part of that as well. But if I'm able to shoot cadence, let's say use one of your metrics here. Let's say if I'm able to shoot, you know, 15 rounds from 7 meters as fast as I can get my dot on my desired point of aim and get all A-zone hits, like right in there, that 4x6 box or whatever your A-zone size is, I can then take that skill back to iron sights. Now, I may not be able to shoot as accurately with iron sights because when compared to a dot, iron sights are big, fat, and clunky. But now, because the dot has focused me to refine and perfect as much as possible my grip technique, and I'm putting more pressure, and I'm putting pressure exactly where it needs to be because the dot has helped me identify and diagnose some of the problems I'm having, I take that skill set back to iron sights, and it's like, poof, I'm way faster, way more consistent. Now again, this isn't a fact, it's not a hard and true fact because shooters are going to be different, but in my experience, just me as a shooter, my personal practice, and also observing students, when they've gotten proficient with the red dot, their iron sight skills improve because the dot forces you to do everything correctly. And it does not give you a lot of room for error because that dot's movement exaggerates what's actually going on in the gun. If you press out a red dot and you see that dot moving around, the same thing happens with iron sights, you just don't notice it. So my answer to that is yes, the red dot, unlike the rifle for some reason, will make you more consistent with your iron sight use. Now, I'm a firm believer in the red dot on the handgun. Probably not really a surprise to anybody watching this video. Started teaching dedicated red dot handgun classes for people who carry them because they're becoming more and more popular for a lot of good reasons, some of those detailed in this video. It's just a more intuitive, more natural, more physiologically reliable way to shoot across a broad degree of physical experiences, unlike iron sights. And you're starting to see a wider and wider adoption in law enforcement, which is one of the reasons why I just started the RDS handgun instructor course, because right now it's going to be law enforcement, military, first come, first serve, closed enrollment, because I want to make sure that these departments, if I'm able to help, they're putting out the best quality information to their officers and getting officers trained up correctly on red dots, and hopefully I can steer them away from spending money on bad red dot sights if I'm able. But I'm a huge believer. In fact, I only have 2 iron sight guns, well, 3 iron sight guns left. Everything else has got a dot on it because I'm a believer. It's what I carry, it's what I believe in. And my iron sight guns I just keep to teach classes where, you know, a lot of the students, or a majority of the students, are going to have iron sight handguns because either they don't believe in the dot, they haven't got comfortable with the dot, or for whatever reason. And then this isn't like a you will, at least not yet, but if you think about it, if you've been in shooting for long enough, if you're my age or older, you'll notice that some of the arguments and disagreements we're having about red dots on handguns, we had 20 years ago on rifles. So we're doing that again. We're starting to come back around, and a lot of the same arguments are being drug out and modified slightly to fit the handgun. about putting an optic on a handgun versus 20 years ago when we talked about red dots and rifles. It's the future. The future is now. And I'm going to continue to do my part to put out the best possible training I can for the red dot optic. Now, if you're new to red dot, put in the time and dedication, and just think about, critically, sit down and think, how long did it take you to actually get proficient with iron sights? It may take you just as much time, probably a little shorter because you've already got the fundamentals down. If you're proficient with iron sights, you understand the fundamentals of shooting the handgun. Now you need to get proficient with the red dot, and it's going to take more time maybe than you initially think. You're not just going to pick it up and be good with it. So you've got to dedicate the time, put in the deliberate practice. I'm Aaron Cowan with Sage Dynamics. Train accordingly.